All right, hello everybody. My screen share stopped working today, so I'm recording this video for you for class. I'm still here, obviously. So then from here, let's go ahead and talk about our notes for today. So we are going to continue to solve radical equations, which is what you worked on Friday. So steps to solving. You need to make sure you isolate the radical. So meaning you move everything outside of the radical to the other side. So if it's a plus 4, you would subtract 4 to both sides, so it's over. Okay, notice when it's outside the radical, not underneath. Then once you do that, you need to undo the radical by taking the inverse of whatever it is. So if it's square root, you're going to square both sides. If it's a cube root, you're going to cube both sides. If it's the fourth root, you're going to put it to the power of 4. If it's the fifth root, you're going to put it to the power of 5. And then from there, you're going to isolate the variable to get x by itself. So number 1 and 2 are ones that we talked about on Friday. So let's go ahead and solve it. So number 1, let's solve for x. So the 2 is on the outside, so I have to subtract 2 to the other side. When I do that, I get the cube root of 4x equals 6. Okay, so step 1 is done. Now step 2, I need to undo the radical. So to undo the radical, this is to the third power on both sides. And so step 2 is done, my radical is undone. This leaves me with 4x equals 6 times 6 times 6, which is 216. Divide by 4 on both sides, and so I think x gives me an answer of 54, and here we go. Done. Okay. So moving on to number 2, it's a very similar problem. So we have the square root of 10x plus 4 equals 14. So our first step again is to isolate the square root. So minus 4 to both sides. I get the square root of 10x. That's gone, equals 14 minus 4 is 10. But now I need to get rid of the square root, so the inverse of square root, square, is put it to the second power. Okay, so 10x equals 10 times 10, which is 100. Then to solve for x, I divide by 10 on both sides, and I get x is equal to 10. Okay, so this is a little bit of a recap from Friday. Now we are going to move on to the more challenging style questions. So before we do that, let's go ahead and jump into a couple of side notes so that you have them before we talk about the next topic. So we are going to talk about how to solve quadratics. So we've been solving linear, now to solve quadratics. So if I have something like x squared plus 9x plus 8 equals 0, a quadratic needs to have all the terms on the same side. So all terms on same side and in order. Okay, notice it goes x squared, x, and then my number. So now how do I solve? When it's a quadratic, I need to factor it, which is what we've been working on. What are the factors of 8 that add to 9? 8 times 1, so x plus 8, x plus 1 equals 0. So notice this is now factored. Once I factor, I can go ahead and solve it. This becomes a very nice problem. So how do I solve it? Well, first part is I get x plus 8 equals 0. The second part is x plus 1 equals 0. Okay, why do I get 2 solutions here? So what do I mean by that? When I solve this side of x, I get x to be negative 8. When I solve this side, I get x equals negative 1. And notice I get 2 solutions here. And what's the reason that I get 2 when I've been getting 1? Is because my exponent usually tells me how many solutions I could potentially get. All right, so let's go ahead and go into more challenging problems. So let's take a look at number 3. I will rewrite number 3 here so we can see it better. So how do we solve something like number 3? So there's nothing on the outside of the square root. So we actually need to get rid of the square root by squaring both sides. When I do that, I get 3 minus 2x equals x squared. And notice, this is a quadratic problem. So then, I need to actually move everything to the x squared side. So here's where I need to move. Well, how do I move things? By adding and subtracting them. So I need to subtract 3 to move it to this side. And then I also need to plus 2x to move it to this side. So what ends up happening is that I just moved everything from the side that cancels out. And then I have a collection of stuff. And so with this collection, I need to put it in order. So then I get x squared plus 2x minus 3. And so this turns into a quadratic. Once I have this quadratic, I need to factor it. So I need to come up with the factors of negative 3 that add to 2, which are x plus 3, x minus 1. Okay? So then from here, I need to solve this. So I take my first value, which is x plus 3, and set it equal to 0. And then I also need to do the other. I take x minus 1 and set it equal to 0. Right? And so the reason why we have two answers is because this turned into a quadratic, which is to the second power. So subtract 3 to both sides. I get x equals negative 3. Add 1, and I get x equals 1. And so this will go into tomorrow's conversation, but I'll let you know today that this solution is what we call an extraneous solution. And so we have x equals negative 3, which is extraneous, and then our other solution is x equals 1. So let's go ahead and try the other one. So we have x equals the square root of 2 minus x. So then, how do I solve this? Well, I need to get rid of the square root. How do I get rid of the square root? Well, same thing. There's nothing on the outside, so I can jump straight into squaring it. Sorry. So when I jump straight into squaring it, okay, I'm left with x squared equals 2 minus x. Okay? And again, just like we talked with before, we need to turn it to a quadratic, so we need to move everything by the x squared. So that says move by x squared. So how? Minus 2 to this side. Instead of a minus x, we have a plus x. So this becomes a collection of terms, and this side equals 0 because it cancels out. So this collection of terms needs to write it in order. So x squared plus x minus 2. Okay. So now how do we solve an x squared function? Well, we need to factor this. So what are the factors of negative 2 that add to 1? So x plus 2, x minus 1 equals 0. Okay? And again, this is just from practice in the last unit and so forth. So then when we go to solve, x plus 2 equals 0. The other one is x minus 1 equals 0. Subtract 2 to both sides. I get x equals negative 2. Add 1 to both sides, and I get x equals 1. And so just like I said, tomorrow I'll go into more detail. This one is called an extraneous solution. Okay? And then this one's the other solution. Will you always have extraneous? No. But I'll go in more detail for tomorrow. Sorry again, you have to watch the video. Remember, you can pause it at any point.